And so that doesn't mean we're going to be anti-human. It means we're going to consider all these different kinds of experiences that humans have and try to protect our opportunity to have all of them, right? Anyway, and this takes us way beyond wilderness preservation, okay? Ecofeminism, social ecology, deep ecology, and environmental virtue ethics all take us quite some distance beyond the 20th century kind of golden age of environmental ethics, where wilderness preservation, all this work got done, right? Species, right, got protected through this Endangered Species Act and then the Wilderness Act, and all these different wilderness areas were protected. A lot of really positive work got done, right? But since then, environmental ethicists have begun to consider that, well, that's not enough, right? I mean, Birch's point, it's quite a striking and radical point. Birch's main point is that wilderness preservation and the idea of extending moral status to ecological wholes is itself part of the project of empire, the project of resource extraction, okay? Because by designating certain isolated, pristine, untrammeled by man areas in our country as wilderness, we pat ourselves on the back, and we also, in that setting aside, right, this is our sacred space. But what does that mean? Everything else is desacralized, not sacred at all, no moral status at all, no enchantment at all, right? Except for Dinosaur, this special rugged little place, right? Except for Yosemite, except for the Grand Canyon, except for, right? But these are tiny little fragments of the land, right? So both deep ecology, environmental pragmatism, all of these environmental ethics traditions we're going to be looking at for the rest of the term, they all are articulating the need to take environmental ethics to the land that's right around us, to our, to the land, air, water, wildlife that's right around us, and not focusing so much on wilderness or even on species. And species preservation is predicated, of course, on protecting land, air, and water. All right, so there's old Arnie as a young man, I think. There he is reading some more. So I just took all this from, I took excerpts from this essay. And let me get this attendance sheet going around while I think of it. From this essay from the encyclopedia. So everyone, you guys got to use this, okay? Everyone in this class can be expected to rely on this resource. Okay, it's excellent, really, really excellent. Encyclopedia of Environmental Ethics and Philosophy. You guys have more resources than any student in the world. You guys can be masters of this stuff, right? I think this is a world-class course. I don't think you can take a better environmental ethics class anywhere. Maybe I'm just arrogant or conceited or something, I don't know. But where can you go to talk about this stuff? Everything's so important that we talk about in this class, right? We never have enough time. So the Encyclopedia of Environmental Ethics and Philosophy, you guys have each other, right? You all have each other's emails. You all can meet, have coffee, have beer together, whatever. You guys can talk about philosophy. You have access to all these online resources, and you should be on top of this stuff, right? And this week and next week and the rest of the term, it's very accessible material. And we are getting political, and we're talking about what we need to do as individuals and as members of a community and as societies, what we need to do to catch up, to catch up our moral reasoning with our technological capacities, right? That's the fatal flaw of Western society, right? Science took off, Francis Bacon, 1620, but nature became disenchanted. Nature lost its interiority. Nature became nothing but a resource, right? And that resulted in catastrophe for us, right? And the catastrophe is unfolding as we speak. 100 years ago, ecology came along and offered a home to moral philosophy, to moral reasoning, because ecology taught us that these interrelationships between humans and ecological wholes are absolutely crucial and vital to our own future, okay? And that means there is a moral dimension to what we do to these ecological wholes, right? So, anyway, we have all these resources, and I want you to take advantage of them, including meeting with your professor, too. I don't get enough visitors. Do your professors want you to visit them? I do. Of course, sometimes I get to the point where nobody visits me, and then I blow off my office hours. And then at that point, somebody knocks on my door. So I apologize if I hear that from a lot of students. Too many professors aren't even there for their own, and that bothers me. But anyway, I'm always available. Look, I'm always available. If you need to meet, I'll fit it into your schedule. Okay? I've kind of okay, well, this is a good page to continue before we take our notes. Before we take our break, because I just want to describe deep ecology from a broader cultural perspective, and to sketch out the wide variety of different elements, different cultural and philosophical elements that have gone into the deep ecology movement. Okay? Look at this incredible diversity, right? An astonishing assortment of backgrounds and interests. Okay, obviously connections between deep ecology and ecological science, those kind of connections, of course, were explored quite, pretty extensively by Aldo Leopold and his followers. But also, deep ecologists have drawn connections between deep ecology and religion, right? And that might turn people, and that's another sign, these guys are kind of foot stampers, right? They're not wishy-washy, they're saying, and a lot of deep ecologists insist that deconstructing and overcoming and dismantling Abrahamic patriarchal religions is one of our most important political projects, right? So, and then New Age spirituality, what's that, man? Hippy-dippy stuff. But if it's done with the idea of offering you a new foundation for your relationship with the natural world, right? Because you don't like the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic, tradition that, right? If you're looking around for some other kind of spiritual orientation that matches your deep ecological insights, then you probably might get into some of these New Age spiritualities, right? Maybe. And then, of course, a lot of these deep ecologists have identified with direct action and ecological sabotage. It's kind of interesting, though, that ecological sabotage, now this is not civil disobedience, okay? Eco-sabotage is not civil disobedience, and that's a very important point, because civil disobedience is a rich tradition of civil disobedience all over the world, right? The idea, but civil disobedient people following this tradition of civil disobedience, like Martin Luther King, like Gandhi, they wait around and take responsibility for the offense that they have committed, right? Whereas these eco-saboteurs, they do what they do in the dark of the night, and they wear masks, and they take great care to not ever be identified, right? And they never would have been identified either. If it hadn't been for this Jake Ferguson, they never would have been identified, and they never would have had to go to jail. But anyway, that's very different, right? And so, unlike civil disobedience, ecological sabotage is on much shakier philosophical ground. And even though they're foot stampers when it comes to the value of life, and they did take great pains, not a single human was injured, okay? I don't mean to be praising them, but we just got to, in a university, we just got to be as objective as possible and be fair where we can be fair. And that's true. They never injured anybody. And all the damage that they did, why? Because that was one of their operating principles. Injure no life at all. No life. Obviously they had to maybe burn a few plants and bushes and stuff, but no sentient being, including no humans, right? So they were consistent as far as that goes. There was one where there was in danger, seriously in danger, and I think they got their sentences increased because of that. But they kind of got lucky too. Anyway, this guy Robinson Jeffers, who I'd never read his work, but the land ethic, of course, of Aldo Leopold, and then look, the monism, and this is because of Naas, right? It's because of Naas and Sessions. Sessions was a philosophy professor who co-authored some anthologies on deep ecology with a sociology professor named Bill Duvall. You'll often encounter their names together, Sessions and Duvall. But Sessions is the philosopher of those two, and he was good buddies with Naas, and they came up with the 8-point platform, 8-point deep ecology platform in the early 1970s. I forget where they were. Were they at Joshua Tree? I think it might have been at Joshua Tree, that national monument in Southern California in the desert. A lot of strange things happen at Joshua. Anyone ever go there? I went there once when I was a young man. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? A lot of strange things happened there. Famous rock stars took LSD and all kinds of UFO sightings. And anyway. And then, of course, Martin Heidegger, too. The phenomenology of Martin Heidegger. I hear this word a lot when it comes to deep ecology, phenomenology. And I mentioned it last week as one of the three 19th century contributions to moral philosophy that have since in the last 150 years or so have really taken off. Pragmatism, phenomenology, and feminism. And they all offer some of the same kinds of insights, but a lot of deep ecologists describe themselves as eco-phenomenologists. And this comes out of the word, and Heidegger was the professor for a whole bunch of really famous French and German philosophers. Heidegger was active in the 1920s and 1930s, all the way up until the 1950s. And he was discredited, though, because of his involvement with the Nazis. But anyway, he also taught Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He taught Jean-Paul Sartre. He taught a whole bunch of very well-known phenomenologists and existentialists. And some of their work has been taken in an environmental ethic or an environmental philosophy direction. Phenomenology, like pragmatism, even more so probably, refuses to separate out morality as some kind of separate. Remember, Noss wants to say that what he's about is environmental consciousness. And he thinks once you have this environmental consciousness, that's what's really important. Not some kind of moral move, but just an awareness. An awareness is what's critical. And once you develop this awareness, then you become a biocentric egalitarian. Kind of the way that Schweitzer describes. All right, so a lot of different influences going in there at a cultural level. So let's take our break. Let's come back in 1 minute after 1, and then we'll get in more philosophical. We'll try to get philosophically deeper with deep ecology.
You were right, though. I was gone, just not last week. It was the week before.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I went to Moab.
Well, then you only missed some of the heavy-duty metaphysical
Well,
stuff.
I was sick on
The birch one is the
Tuesday,
week that was good. Last week was really important, I think.
Yeah, no, I just yeah, I took my buddy down to the ultra marathon down in Moab.
Oh, yeah? Wow.
Yeah.
It's a good time of year to do that, huh? The only time of year, probably.
Yeah.
too hot.
It started off as 28 degrees when we started, and then it's like 50 degrees by then. And I ended up getting sunburned. So,
Really? Cool.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Nora?
Yeah. And I totally, my buddy that went down with me, I made sure that he was reading Desert Solitaire, because you can't not be down there.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Sure.
I'm very sorry. I forgot to send myself the summary
Okay.
in an email, so can I send it to you tonight?
Well, the summary of deep ecology is due on Thursday, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, the one that was supposed to, that Birch
Oh,
one,
the Thomas Birch.
that you would extend it. I forgot.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, you can send it. Yeah. Just
But it'll probably be later today because I'm going to be at the library because I have a big test.
okay.
So I apologize.
Okay. No worries.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Just send it to me whenever you can.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, darn it. Anyway, I have these topics. I'll email them out. All right? I apologize. Yeah. I have about maybe 9 or 10 term paper topics that I've already articulated that you might want to use. But then you're also free to make a topic of your own. Okay? So... Yeah, it seems like with those guys, my friends, really, my friends and acquaintances down in Eugene, they they reached a conclusion that we're in a state of war, that these giant transnational timber companies and energy companies, mining companies, have taken such control over our governance structures in this country, especially at a federal level. You know, federal lands are being raped and pillaged, and all these living communities that are defenseless and innocent are being assaulted every day. And it's unfair, totally unfair, that these innocent, harmless creatures are suffering for the benefit of a few transnational elites and the enrichment of a few people. And so they viewed that as a state of war, and that's a very dangerous move. It's a very dangerous outlook to view the world, to view what you care about most deeply as being under assault, under unprincipled assault, where you have no recourse, and where your only recourse is to pick up a weapon. Right? And they insisted, not a weapon to harm any other human or any other living thing, but a weapon to harm the capitalist, global, industrial apparatus that's ravaging the earth, right? The technological termites on steroids. But once and at that point, when you view the term so starkly, as a war, then you begin to justify in your mind doing things that you would never justify absent the state of war. All right? So that was a fatal mistake probably on their part, but many of them came from backgrounds where they were really committed. I mean, they worked really hard. They were the kind of people that you saw going door to door in neighborhoods, with a little clipboard, with a bunch of information about, the old growth forest is being raped and pillaged, and, can you please donate $10 to save, They did all that, they worked really hard, and they were part of grassroots environmental organizations, and they tried all these other methods of addressing their grievances, and none of them were effective. And so at that point, they made that decision, and it was a fateful decision, and it was a mistake. But and that's where their foot stamping stopped, right? When they realized, right, their foot stamping, it's like everything has value. Including that human being over there who happens to own that business, which I'm going to go now going to go, harm. I'm going to harm that property because I don't know what he's doing, I don't like what he's doing to the forest. But now you're instrumentalizing, right? Now you're saying because of the outcome that you're pursuing, right, which is in a state of war, right? That's what happens in a state of war. The combatants in a state of war justify everything they're doing because of the outcome. We have to win this war. That's why we have to rape all these women in this village. That's why we have to indoctrinate all these kids. That's why we have to do all these evil things, right? Drop these bombs on all these poor innocent people, right? Because if we don't, then they will do that to us, right? And so the golden rule, really, in a state of war is do unto others before they do unto you, right? And so that's what these radical environmentalists, that's the trap that they kind of fell into in their thinking, right? That was their defect in their thinking. But then you might say, well, what is the principled stand? The principled stand, is to abstain from property damage and eco-sabotage, and to engage in traditional civil disobedience where you take responsibility for your actions. Trouble is with that, of course, is that some of these laws are so draconian that you can't take responsibility for your actions, and you have to go underground. So anyway, it's things are really messed up. But our goal today is just to try to reconstruct the axiological orientation and the normative tradition. Try to reconstruct the ethic of deep ecology. And it's really sprawling, though. It's really all over the place. Okay? In one sense, deep ecology represents the psychologization of environmental philosophy. Deep ecology in this sense, in this narrow sense, refers to an egalitarian and holistic environmental philosophy founded on phenomenological methodology. Phenomenology is just an openness to the phenomena, right? Phenomena as opposed to noumena, okay? Anyway, I don't want to get too distracted. Yes, go ahead, Rose. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Rose. So in one sense, deep ecology represents the psychologization of environmental philosophy. By way of direct experience of non-human nature, one recognizes the equal intrinsic worth of all biota, as well as one's own ecological interconnectedness with the life world in all its plenitude. There is an account of maturity, of what it means to become a mature human being that deep ecology offers us. Okay? The successful life is one that is one in which we evolve. The thinker evolves from recognizing his own or her own intrinsic worth to eventually recognizing the intrinsic worth of all biota and interconnectedness with the life world in all its plenitude. Okay? So there are four thinkers. If those of you who want to do more background, you have to read Arne Naess, above all. You have to read George Sessions. David Rothenberg is another very interesting figure who comes from a phenomenological background. And he's also a self-described deep ecologist. And then the Australian Warwick Fox, who's moved beyond deep ecology and is still very active and writing some very influential pieces. And he's probably the most valuable of all those four to read, I would say, other than Naess. Naess can be a little dense sometimes. Fox is probably a little easier reading. Okay, so Arne Naess invented the term deep ecology in a famous 1973 English language article, The Shallow and the Deep Long-Range Ecology Movement. By ecology movement, Naess means a cosmology or worldview. Naess faults European and North American civilization for the arrogance of its human-centered instrumentalization of non-human nature. He contrasts his new deep or radical ecological worldview with the dominant shallow or reform paradigm. So it's true, very interestingly enough, probably Nate's observation is the most common, and the deep ecologists are most commonly lumped together with the Kantian, what you've learned to describe as the neo-Kantian ecocentrists. Okay, they're clearly ecocentrists, and they're probably more neo-Kantian than neo-Humean. Okay, and they use this language too, right, of instrumentalization. Naess faults our civilization for what we do to everything else besides us, right? We instrumentalize everything besides humans. And that's what's wrong with our culture. That's the central cultural criticism that deep ecology offers us, right? Instrumentalization of the natural world is wrong. And that's kind of sounds like a neo-Kantian argument, right? But Naess is coming from a much older not much older, but an earlier Enlightenment tradition, right? Because Naess he's coming from Spinoza. He's undermining, he's attacking Cartesian dualism. So he's not really, his target isn't Kant, and he's not really making Kantian arguments, but he ends up sounding like he's making Kantian arguments. Naess contrasts deep or radical ecology with the dominant shallow or reform paradigm. And really, I think you could put shallow ecology described by Naess side by side with Group A conservationism, and you'd find they're basically the same. It's the same group of people. Okay, the shallow ecologists are the Group A's. The deep ecologists are Group B's and beyond. Okay. He contrasts his new deep ecological worldview with the shallow or reformist paradigm. The shallow worldview, which he finds to be typical of mainstream environmentalism, is merely an extension of European and North American anthropocentrism. And here he's using the word moral, he's using the word extension in a different way than I was using it last week, right? I mean, what he's saying here is that shallow mainstream environmentalism really is just anthropocentric, right? It's just all about, well, let's save the forests because we need them as a place to do our recreation. Let's save the forests because they're pretty to us. Let's save the forests because they filter our water and they filter our air. Let's save the forests because the forests keep biodiversity thriving, right? And we need biodiversity, right? And those are all anthropocentric reasons, right? That's a different use of the word, and that's just an extension of, that's just anthropocentrism, right? But what someone like Rolston does is he takes deontological arguments and he extends them by identifying these new, and that's another form of moral extensionism, but that's not an extension of anthropocentrism, that's an extension of neo-Kantian thinking, right? Anyway, And that may be flawed too, right? Birch's point is that every time we try to limit moral status to one or more of these categories, we find that we have obligations toward more than just what we've identified as being in that category, right? And certainly Birch's argument is totally consistent with deep ecology too, right? Because Birch says that everything has we have a prima facie obligation to treat everything as though it has to assume that everything has moral status, right? Including rocks. So that's about as deep as you can go. Okay, the deep ecological worldview questions the fundamental assumptions of European and North American environmentalism. It digs conceptually deeper. In doing so, deep ecological thinking is not a slight reform, but a substantial reorientation of our whole civilization. This radicalism has inspired many environmental activists to hoist up deep ecology as their banner in calling for nothing less than the redirection of human history. What's interesting is that social ecology and deep ecology, we're studying these guys side by side, right? These two different traditions, and they emerged around the same time. Okay, Murray Bookchin is doing all of his work, all of his really important work, in the 1960s and 1970s. And by the time deep ecology emerges quite explosively on the political scene, social ecology had been articulating a social movement, a social justice movement extended to the environment, extended, including ecological concerns. They'd already been doing all that for quite a while. Or, these movements kind of emerged contemporaneously. But very interestingly, deep ecology is the one that caught on and that resonated. Although and what's interesting too is that in Europe, to the extent that there are a lot of radical environmentalists in Europe too, right? The Green Movement. But they draw much more on environmental justice and social ecology traditions than they do on deep ecology. So it's interesting how deep ecology was started by a Norwegian, by a European, but politically it had the most influence in the United States, in Canada, and probably Australia, right? Whereas social ecology originated with Murray Bookchin, and a whole bunch of other things. Many of them are Americans, though, like Murray Bookchin grew up in, New York. He's a New York guy. Anyway, and yet the deep ecologists, it's just because they weren't paying attention, right? But bioregionalism that's kind of their political orientation, right? That's kind of how that's a lifestyle, a green lifestyle movement, right? That a lot of deep ecologists identify with. But bioregional thinking also doesn't really come out of anything like the same, it's just ad hoc, right? They've combined these two, bioregionalism and deep ecology, just because politically that's just, that made sense to people. But philosophically, they're not very consistent. Okay. So there's Professor Naas again. He was an Norwegian. He just died a few years ago. He lived to be quite old. I think he lived to be about 100. He was born in 1912. I think he just passed away a few years ago. But he was a national hero. His nephew, another Naas, I forget his nephew's name, but I found this one picture of his nephew married Diana Ross, the Supremes. His nephew was a famous Norwegian mountain climber, and they were nationally, their wedding was nationally celebrated. That was around 1986, I think. There's a picture of them at their wedding, and on the internet you can find. I think he perished tragically in a mountain. His nephew did. The other famous, some mountain climbing accident. All right, so here we're getting a little more philosophical now. We're trying to pin this down. We have to, right? And we may, as philosophers, may find, after doing this analysis, that deep ecology is just lacking. It's wanting. There's something defective about it. Maybe, let's see. All right, deep ecology, and because we're going to get to some criticisms of deep ecology, all right, and that'll eventually lead us towards social ecology too, because a lot of these criticisms of deep ecology are coming from social ecologists. So deep ecology in its narrow academic sense rests on two foundations, an axiology, and this is a little bit different than the way I've presented this material to you, but okay, let's just go with it. An axiology, which is defined here as the study of the criteria of value systems and ethics. right? The criteria of value. What gives an entity moral status, right? An axiology of biocentric egalitarianism and an ontology, okay? Substitute the word metaphysics if that's easier for you. Ontology is the study of existence or the study of being. Phenomenologists are really big into ontology. Heidegger, if you want to read the word ontology a whole bunch of times and read some Heidegger, he's really into that stuff. The study of being, right? All right. Anyway, an ontology of metaphysical holism, which asserts that the biosphere, right? So both biocentric egalitarianism and holism of a metaphysical variety, which asserts that the biosphere does not consider, and this is where he's attacking the very foundations of Western scientific understandings of nature, right? He's attacking Cartesianism. The biosphere does not consist of discrete entities, but rather internally related individuals that make up an ontologically unbroken whole, okay? You guys have heard the term systems thinking or systems theory? Ecology is a form of systems theory. Okay, metaphysical holism, all right? Ecology is, in a way, inherently holistic, right? Because it begins by observing that the biosphere does not consist of discrete entities, but rather internally related individuals that make up an ontologically unbroken whole. So you can't study the individuals apart from the whole in which they're interconnected. Both of these principles of biocentric egalitarianism and metaphysical holism are rooted in an intuitive epistemology reminiscent of Descartes' clear and distinct criteria. Once you grasp them, their truth is beyond doubt. Very phenomenological, and actually a lot of phenomenology is kind of a renewal of Descartes' method of doubting everything. The first principle, biocentric egalitarianism, holds that biota have equal intrinsic value. It denies differential valuation of organisms. As Nas said, the equal right to live and blossom is an intuitively clear and obvious value axiom. In the words of the sociologist Bill Duvall, writing with George Sessions, all organisms and entity in the ecosphere as parts of the interrelated whole are equal in intrinsic worth. Okay, so they're making a claim that we've already encountered, right? When we read Schweitzer. Okay, this biocentric egalitarianism is the same doctrine that Schweitzer was arguing for. The same axiological theory. Nas shrewdly preempts invariable attacks on this idea of the equal worth of all organisms by adding the qualifier in principle, right? Prima facie, in principle. Because any realistic praxis necessitates some killing, exploitation, and suppression, right? This qualifier has not, however, staved off criticisms of biocentric egalitarianism. Sessions has categorically rejected any differential axiology on the grounds that hierarchies of value lay the groundwork